Our programs vary from year to year by country, but we can certainly say that the countries that we are most active in would be Ethiopia, where I'm sitting right now. We've been very active in Sudan and South Sudan during the various peace processes happening there since the early 2000s. In Kenya somewhat during their devolution process and ongoing. Then we've been active off and on quite a bit in Nigeria, of course, and we expect to be active in Somalia in the near future. That's probably will be the newest federation on the continent, but they have a long way to go.
And could you unpack the political, administrative, legal, infrastructure, economy, the various fields within which the formal federation plays a role?
Sure. I mean, when you're working in federalism, you have to work from a multidisciplinary point of view. I'm a generalist. I'm a program manager. I direct programs, and quite often what I have to do is negotiate. I know where the lawyers and law professors and practitioners are coming from. I know where the economists are coming from. I'm not an expert in any of those fields, but I have to make sure that we bring it all together. It really depends on the subject matter. Of course, sometimes if we're doing something on constitutional interpretation, you're probably going to need a lawyer. If we're doing something on fiscal equalization formula, you're probably going to need someone with a finance or economics background. If you want to understand the overall societal dynamics or the conflict management dynamics or diversity management dynamics of federalism, you have to look at it from an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary point of view. And if you look at it, what we are naturally doing in Africa is we're often working with very emergent new states, new nations, new structures for the a state that has been through crisis. So we talk about the need for understanding political accommodation, good governance, and democratic development. And those three, that triad, needs all the perspectives. And so if you are going to focus only on the constitutional design, that's fine, it's very important, but who's going to implement it? Do the lawyers really understand in that particular countries the economic implications of having a certain distribution of revenues and expenditure assignments in a country that has a completely different economic makeup and has a different capacity? So those kinds of things, if you don't have that holistic approach, I've seen quite a few projects where I thought they did more harm than good. So I really feel that when it comes to these kinds of issues, you need to take a multidisciplinary approach, except if you are looking at a particular piece. I mean, obviously, there, as I mentioned already, revising a fiscal revenue sharing formula, etc. Yeah, you need specialists at times, but generally you need to start with a multidisciplinary approach. I was actually working in Burma, Myanmar. And I was trying to create a presentation for a discussion of parliamentarians about what the heck is federalism and how does it relate to national transition. So instead of starting with the ABCs of what is a federation, what's the difference between a federation and a decentralized unitary system, etc., I started with why do countries become federations? So to my mind, there's the dimension of political accommodation. How are we going to live together? What are the dimensions of the country that have to be addressed, that have not been addressed successfully in the past in several countries, or have to be tweaked in a more advanced federation? Those are things, the typical, how the centrifugal forces, how do we manage those? How do we deal with historical grievances, etc.? So political accommodation has to happen. The Ethiopia case is a classic one. The political accommodation of the major ethnic groups was the first and foremost, one would almost say, I wouldn't say exclusive, but very much the dominant rationale for the people who brought the federal system into Ethiopia. But then there's the question of good governance. You can sign an agreement, you can sign a constitution, and maybe you can even make an elite pact that might be more stable than the old elite pact. But how many years can you get away without good governance. Without some delivery of basic services, whether it's security or basic health and water and infrastructure, and very critically, without corruption getting to a point where it takes over the public treasury. So these are the basic good governance things. For the political accommodation to survive, you need some aspects of good government that fights corruption, provides services, etc. Then the question is, you have authoritarian regimes around the world who have found a political accommodation, maybe by force or by some form of negotiation, and like some of these countries do manage to deliver services even better than their democratic neighbors. But at some point, you have to have democratic development, especially if you want to call yourself a maturing, evolving, and fully fledged federation. Have you brought government closer to the people? Have you really addressed grievances? Are you really building and bonding across the communities? And to do that, you need democratic development. So to me, that's the way I look at it. And the other reason why I use that is that in my experience in different countries, usually there's a class of people who think only about political accommodation, and that's all they're concerned about. Maybe they're separatists who are just concerned about getting more autonomy for their region. And then no one is talking to them, and no one is forcing them to have policies about democratic development and good governance. Then you have people who are often the technocrats. They think it's all about better financial management systems, fighting corruption, etc. All very important things. But if you're naive about the political accommodation dynamics, the divisions in the society, you're never going to get there. And and then democratic development, first and foremost, it's an end in and of itself. But the idea is that if you want the political accommodation to work genuinely and put the country on a long-term trajectory, you're going to have pluralist, inclusive politics. Eventually, I'm not saying you can't make some important steps without a full-fledged Western liberal democracy. But at some point, there has to be some experimentation, some growth, some maturing of democracy. There are often people who, that's all they care about. They're thinking, well, this is just about human rights. This is just about the rights of the citizen. But if they're not understanding the grievances of the rebel groups or the grievances of even sometimes the dominant group, if they don't understand those dynamics, they're just not going to get there. So the federal solution, the federal idea, doesn't get to have the traction it needs, let alone come to fruition. So you need to have all three perspectives.